The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. People may have told you about me from that book Mr. Mark Twain wrote about Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter. My name is Huckleberry Finn. After Tom and I found a treasure trove left by robbers, I was suddenly rich. The widow Douglas and her sister, Miss Watson, took me in to civilize me. They forced me into starchy new clothes that made me sweat, made me go to school, and tried to teach me manners I had no use for. It was so awful regular and decent that I felt cramped and smothered. I missed my old rags and the freedom of sleeping in a hogshead barrel whenever I pleased. Just as I was starting to get broken into their ways, my pap showed up. I hadn't seen him in over a year. He was a mean, ignorant man, and the sight of my clean clothes and the fact that I could read made him furious. He said no son of his was going to be better than him. He took me from the widow and dragged me deep into the woods to a little log cabin, where he'd lock me in for days at a time while he went to town to get drunk. The loneliness was heavy, and I knew I had to get away or I might not survive him. I staged my own murder. I smashed the cabin door with an axe, killed a wild pig I found, and used its blood to make it look like I'd been dragged away and killed by robbers. Then, under the cover of darkness, I slipped away in a canoe I'd found and paddled down the river to the quiet solitude of Jackson's Island. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free. I lived on sweet berries and fresh fish, and the stars were my only roof. The world was hushed, and I was my own master. After 3 days of peaceful living, I stumbled upon the smoking embers of a campfire. I crept through the bushes, my heart pounding, and found Miss Watson's slave, Jim. He was terrified, thinking I was a ghost. Once I convinced him I was alive, he told me he'd run away. He'd overheard Miss Watson planning to sell him down to New Orleans for $800, which would separate him from his wife and children forever. Society told me I should turn him in, but Jim was my friend. I looked him in the eye and promised I wouldn't tell a soul. We were partners now. A storm flooded the river and washed up a huge timber raft, 10 or 12 feet wide and 15 feet long. It was our ticket to freedom. We decided to float down the mighty Mississippi River by night, aiming for the town of Cairo, where the Ohio River met the Mississippi. From there, Jim could take a steamboat up to the Free States and be safe. The raft became our home and the river our guide. It was a powerful, peaceful life, just us and the wide, dark water. One night, a fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I was in the canoe and got separated from the raft. I hollered for Jim until my voice was raw, lost in the white darkness for hours. When I finally found him asleep on the raft the next morning, I decided to play a mean trick on him, pretending he'd dreamed the whole thing. When he figured it out, the look of hurt in his eyes was terrible. He said trash is what people is that puts dirt onto header-day friends and makes 'em ashamed. I felt so low and mean, I apologized to him. It was a hard thing to do, but it was right. A while later, we came upon 2 scoundrels being chased by dogs and men. We rescued them, and they were no sooner on our raft than they started putting on airs. One was a young man who claimed to be the rightful Duke of Bridgewater, and the other, an old, bald-headed fraud, declared he was the long-lost Dauphin, the King of France. They were nothing but a couple of con men, but Jim and I had to play along to keep the peace on our raft. The Duke and the King were a plague. They ran scams in every town we passed, from fake acting shows to phony preaching. Their worst scheme was when they learned of the death of a wealthy man named Peter Wilkes. They went to his town and pretended to be his long-lost brothers from England, hoping to steal the entire inheritance from his 3 sweet, grieving daughters. It made me sick to my stomach to watch them weep and hug those poor, trusting girls. I couldn't let them get away with it. That night, I snuck into the con men's room, stole the bag of gold they'd been given, and hid it in Peter Wilkes's coffin. The next day I found the oldest daughter, Mary Jane, and told her the whole truth. It caused a huge commotion, and in the confusion, I managed to slip away and get back to the raft. I thought Jim and I were finally free of them, but just as we were pushing off, we saw the Duke and the King paddling furiously toward us. The King was so mad he nearly strangled me, but there wasn't much they could do. Their next act was the lowest of all. In the next town, while I was exploring, the King, desperate for whiskey money, sold Jim. He sold him to a local farmer for $40 miserable. When I found out, my world fell apart. My conscience, the voice of everything I'd ever been taught, told me to write to Miss Watson and tell her where her runaway property was. It was the right thing to do. I sat there with the letter in my hand, shaking. I got to thinking about our journey down the river, the stars, the talks we'd had, and how Jim had protected me and been so good to me. He was my only friend in the world. I thought about how he'd be sold down the river, never to see his family again. I looked at the letter, the key to my being good again. Then I said it out loud. All right then, I'll go to hell. I ripped the letter to shreds. I was going to steal Jim out of slavery, and whatever came of it, I would face it. I found out Jim was being held at a farm owned by a man named Silas Phelps. When I arrived, a woman came running out and smothered me in hugs, calling me Tom. She had mistaken me for her nephew, Tom Sawyer, who was expected for a visit. It was the most incredible luck. Just then, a steamboat arrived, and who should get off but the real Tom Sawyer? I intercepted him, told him the whole story, and he, always up for an adventure, agreed to help me free Jim by pretending to be his own younger brother, Sid. My plan was simple. Steal the key to the hut where Jim was being held, unlock the door, and run for the raft. But Tom Sawyer scoffed at that. He said it was too plain, too easy. He insisted that Jim's escape had to be done with style, just like in the adventure books he was always reading. He wanted to make it a grand, elaborate production, full of secret messages, cryptic warnings, and unnecessary dangers. I knew it was foolish, but Tom wouldn't have it any other way. Tom's style was nothing but trouble. Instead of using the key, he insisted we dig Jim out with case knives. It took us a week of hard labor, and left our hands raw and blistered. He said Jim, who was being held in a hut on the ground, absolutely had to have a rope ladder made from one of Aunt Sally's best bedsheets. We spent hours tearing it into strips and tying it together, all for a ladder that went nowhere. The foolishness kept piling up. Tom decided that every proper prisoner keeps a journal, so he made Jim carve inscriptions onto a rock. Then he declared that Jim needed animal companions in his hut. He made me help him catch spiders, snakes, and rats to put in the hut with Jim, who was deathly afraid of them. Poor Jim went along with all of it, thinking it was all part of the white folks' mysterious, complicated plan to set him free. I was getting sick of the whole charade, but Tom was having the time of his life. To make the escape more thrilling, he began writing anonymous warning letters to the Phelps family. He wrote them in blood, with drawings of skulls and crossbones, warning them that a gang of cutthroats was planning to steal their runaway slave. He was turning his game into a real-life danger for all of us. Finally, the night of the escape arrived. Tom's letters had worked far too well. When we crept toward Jim's hut, we saw that Mr. Phelps had gathered a dozen local farmers, all armed with long rifles, waiting in the shadows to ambush the gang. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't one of Tom's stories anymore. The danger was real, and the guns were loaded. We made a break for it. The second we burst from the hut, the men started shouting and the guns started firing. We ran for our lives through the dark woods, bullets whizzing past our heads. We made it to the raft and were about to push into the current when Tom let out a cry. A bullet had caught him in the calf of his leg. We managed to get away downriver, but Tom's leg was bad, and he was burning up with fever. I knew we had to keep going to get Jim to freedom, but Jim refused. He looked at Tom, delirious and pale, and said he would not leave him to die in the woods. He insisted that I go back to the town and fetch a doctor, even though he knew it meant risking his own capture and being sent back into slavery, maybe forever. I found a doctor and sent him out to the raft. The next morning, a group of men brought Jim back to the Phelps farm, bound in heavy chains. They were angry and ready to treat him harshly, but the doctor stood up for him. He told everyone how Jim had refused to escape and had stayed to help nurse the wounded boy, risking his own freedom out of loyalty and kindness. Just then, Tom Sawyer woke up from his fever and decided it was time to end his game. "You can let Jim go," Tom announced weakly. "He's been a free man this whole time." It turned out that Miss Watson had passed away 2 months earlier. In her will, feeling remorseful, she had legally set Jim free. Tom had known this all along. He had received the letter but hid it, putting us all through this terrible danger and heartache just for the adventure of it. As if on cue, Tom's Aunt Polly arrived, having come to check on him, and she confirmed every last word of the story. So Jim was finally free, and Tom, feeling a bit guilty, gave him $40 for his troubles. Then Jim told me something he'd kept secret to protect me. He said that the dead man we had seen in that floating house, way back at the start of our journey, had been my pap. So I was free, too. Free from pap and from my past. Aunt Sally offered to adopt and civilize me for good, but I reckon I've had enough of that. I figure I'll light out for the territory ahead of the rest, because I can't stand being cramped up. I've been there before,